Welcome to the very first episode of TRG Talks Trade. We're going to start with the first installment of our series, Disasters at Sea, where we will examine the outcomes of past mishaps on the ocean. Today's episode will be the story of General Average and the MSC Sabrina. The MSC Sabrina is a container ship built in 1989 with a carrying capacity of 2,829 TEUs and an overall length of 243 meters, or 797.2 feet. In March of 2008, on her way to the port of Montreal, the MSC Sabrina ran aground in the St. Lawrence River near Trois-Rivières, Quebec, Canada. When initial attempts to free the ship using tugboats failed, it became apparent that the Sabrina had become stuck in 2 feet of clay. In order to save the ship and her $100 million worth of cargo, the Mediterranean Shipping Company put together a plan for her rescue. First, they would offload the cargo from the ship to lighten her load. Then they would wait for high tide to come to help refloat the ship. Then they would use tugboats to pull her free. So after receiving approval from Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard, the plan was put into motion. The MSC Jasmine was brought onto the scene due to the fact that it has its own onboard cranes. These cranes were used to unload approximately 400 containers in the hopes of lightening the MSC Sabrina in order to refloat her. After spending an entire night transferring containers from the Sabrina to the Jasmine was able to transport the rescued cargo to port. The Sabrina was then left to wait for higher tides to aid in the refloating process. And finally, the MV Ocean Delta and 4 other tugboats were deployed to pull the MSC Sabrina free from the mud. Once freed, the Sabrina was finally able to be pulled into port and offload the remaining cargo. While it was a very successful rescue, the entire rescue process took a month. The Sabrina initially got stuck on March 8th and was finally able to make it to port on April 4th, meaning that the ship and her cargo was stranded offshore for that entire month. Now, in addition to the delay, this event also resulted in the declaration of General Average. Many people associate General Average with the jettison of cargo. However, there are many different situations that result in the declaration of General Average. The official law states there is a General Average Act when and only when an extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is intentionally and reasonably made or incurred for the common safety or the purpose of preserving from peril the property involved in a common maritime adventure. In the case of the MSC Sabrina, there was an extraordinary expenditure in the form of the cost it took to save the ship. Now, we are not average adjusters, so we cannot say for sure, but the general average claim value most likely included the cost of redirecting the MSC Jasmine to unload the Sabrina, the cost of using tugboats to pull the Sabrina free, and the expense of keeping the Sabrina's crew on board and safe throughout the additional month. These are just some examples of the cost that it took to save the journey, save the ship from peril. Probably the part of General Average that is the most difficult for cargo owners to wrap their head around is the average bond that must be placed before they can claim their cargo. Now, this is separate from the cost of your General Average contribution, which if you want more info on how that works and even what General Average is, we have some informative videos that define it and give you some more insight on that. They should be linked in the video description of this video, or I believe we're going to put them in the cards up here. So if you want to watch those after this. But basically, average bond, this is a cash bond that acts as a promise that the cargo owner will pay the determined contribution to the general average once it is determined by the average adjuster. However, cargo owners that have a marine cargo insurance policy do not have to place an average bond. Instead, now this is typical, you have to check with your cargo insurance provider to be sure, but most cargo insurance policies are going to do this. The cargo insurance policy would act as the general average guarantee. So by having that cargo insurance policy in place, the cargo insurance is guaranteeing that your contribution to the general average will be covered once it is figured out. And these contributions can take years to be calculated. In a lot of examples, they take up to 5 years to be determined. If you had to place that cash bond staying on file and not with you for 5 years while the average adjuster figures out what your actual contribution is. So for reference, one company with cargo aboard the MSC Sabrina, when it struck ground, was required to post a $125,000 average bond in order to receive its cargo, which was valued at $110,000. So you can easily see how, placing this average bond can quickly become more expensive than the value of your goods. And a lot of that depends on what the cost of the general average contribution would be. It gets a little confusing, but this is just another good reason why, having a cargo insurance policy protects you from things like this. General average is an event that happens very unpredictably. Nobody knows when it's going to happen. It's usually, due to heavy weather or a fire on board, all these unpredictable situations. So it's best to be protected. I hope that you enjoyed this story of general average and the MSC Sabrina, and maybe learned a little bit more about how general average really happens in the real world and what it looks like. We're going to be doing more of these stories in this series in the coming months, so please do not forget to subscribe if you're interested in seeing some of those. If you're currently shopping for cargo insurance or just looking for an additional option for your company, don't forget that TRG offers annual all-risk policies at flexible rates made to suit your needs.